Welcome, everyone, to the Positively Trek podcast. We have an exciting, auspicious week for Star Trek, of course, with the recent premiere of the... I almost said Star Trek The Next Generation. Nope, it's Star Trek Picard, but kind of Star Trek The Next... Anyway, Barry, how's it going?
Oh, it's going pretty well, my good man. It's been a busy time, and it's nice to have some new Trek popping back into the old feed again.
Yeah, and I mean, this is exciting. We're a week into it. The second episode will be airing in just a couple days, actually tomorrow by the time this episode comes out. And we're going to be barreling full speed ahead 10 episodes until that season finale. It's going to go quickly before we know it. So I figured it was a good time to kind of sit and talk about this first episode. We don't tend to do episode reviews on this show, but I felt like this is kind of a special thing that needs a bit of observance from Positively Trek.
I would agree with you in the sense that I think I'm loath to review a first episode, I guess, is that sense of like saying like, this is good or bad. I think this is let's take apart all of the things, because as you were showing me before we started recording, your notes for your Kurtratz video is going to be quite the affair, I would imagine.
Yeah, there is a lot in this episode, so I'm excited to talk about it. Again, like you said, not necessarily a review, but more of a just kind of acknowledgement of this momentous thing in the Star Trek universe. So, this show talks a lot about current Star Trek events as well as big issues, and this is the biggest thing going on in Star Trek right now, so it makes sense. But before we get to that, we do have some news this week, and of course, like I've been saying, the biggest news is Picard, but there are a few other things that we want to talk about. So I like this first news story, not necessarily something I'm going to pick up, but I do like that this is happening. We have Star Trek Lower Decks Volume 1 soundtrack getting a special vinyl release this March from Lakeshore Records. And Star Trek music is something that I've always loved, I think is very important. And I think music from something like Lower Decks might get overlooked sometimes. But they are doing some great stuff on Lower Decks, and it's kind of cool they're getting this special release.
Absolutely. If I could geek out a little bit, maybe a la listening to film style here, I love the rich tones of a vinyl record, especially when you're listening to orchestral music like Lower Decks. And that's wonderful. I don't like vinyl just because it's really hard to move. Basically, like, when the time comes, if you have to move from house to house and you have a, 50 to 100 record collection, you are lifting a lot of very heavy vinyl. And maybe I'm just being an old crank, but I can't lift that much anymore, and it makes me really tired. And I would much rather just keep my music on the computer or on my phone or something. But getting to listen, I was sort of imagining the idea of getting to put like those big old reel-to-reel styled headphones on and just kicking back and listening to the Lower Decks opening theme, which I have to say kind of it's a mixture, I find, between Gustav Holst's The Jupiter Suite mixed with Camille Saint-Saëns' The Aquarium. The last one I can't remember, but I'll bring it up in a following episode or perhaps later on in the episode, Dan. But I love the fact that the opening theme especially does kind of take us back to The Next Generation, and obviously the motion pictures film as well. But I just love the fact that they're doing this. It's nice. I think people are going to enjoy it. And if you are into lifting vinyl when you move or when you have to move, then I think this is the product for you.
Yeah, for sure. It looks like a lot of fun for collectors. The contents leave out about a dozen tracks from the digital release simply due to capacity limitations. But still, if you have a collection of vinyl, I think this would look really cool on a shelf next to them, and pulling that down every once in a while and giving it a spin. That sounds like so much fun.
That would be just kind of fun. And now I'm just doing a quick little geek thing here. So apparently a record can get you about 220 megabytes on either side. So that is definitely why they can't get those extra 10 songs on there.
Well, moving on now to comics news. We have quite a bit of interesting comics news this week because IDW is just like, they are cranking out these books. I can't believe how much Star Trek content we have. And now they've announced a new comic miniseries set right after Star Trek The Motion Picture. Star Trek The Motion Picture Echoes is the title. So this is really fascinating. I say what you will about the motion picture era, it has a very distinctive look. I think it might be really cool to see that in comic book form. And as I've said several times on this podcast, the motion picture will always hold a really special place in my heart. So I'm kind of eager to get a look at this.
Me too. I think the artwork is phenomenal, what I'm seeing so far. It's in a style that I really like. And yeah, I think they really incorporate the look of that, late 1970s reboot, I guess you could say, of Star Trek. Everyone's in their, what looks like they're kind of like pajama uniforms and stuff like that, which I think is wonderful. I hope they revisit sort of the way Spock was portrayed and Kirk was portrayed. They don't have to worry about anyone's arms in this. Of course, some of the big complaints about the motion picture is everyone sort of stands there with their arms hanging to their sides. I don't know. I like you, love the motion picture, I think specifically for its aesthetic and to some degree its nostalgia. I think it's a good addition, and I probably will pick this up at least in digital form just to check it out because, yeah, IDW is just pumping them out. So let's go for it.
For sure. And we do have an official synopsis as well. Echoes pits the venerated Admiral James T. Kirk and his crew against enemies both terrifying and shockingly familiar. When a space anomaly thrusts a criminal mastermind pursued by a very determined pilot on a mission into our universe, the Enterprise must stop them from unintentionally starting a war with the Romulans and unleashing a superweapon of foreign technology into the system. But things get infinitely more complicated when these newcomers to our reality remove their helmets, revealing that they're doppelgangers of our beloved heroes.
Maybe some mirror universe vibes here or something like that.
Yeah, sounds maybe something along those lines. So fascinating, as Spock would say.
Yeah, I think it'll be cool to see how they portray the Romulans in this kind of world. Are they going to kind of 70s-ify them? Because, if you think about the next generation, the Romulans getting their 90s shoulder pads, I wonder how they're going to do it. I think it'll be neat. I'm hoping it'll be something of like a blend between the next generation, what we see, and the original kind of very iridescent, colorful Romulan uniforms.
I'm also thinking back, and I know there's no real connection here, but the Romulans in like the DC Comics run back in the 80s and stuff, they were very, I don't know, I felt like they wore a lot of like Power Rangers type suits and had really big, huge weapons and stuff.
Ready to go snowmobiling?
Exactly, yeah. Well, speaking of IDW, we have a look at the comics coming out in May, and the slate, as we've kind of hinted at, is huge. We have the Star Trek ongoing series, the Star Trek Defiant spin-off series from that, and what I really want to highlight is this annual 2023 issue, which promises to be a huge crossover with everyone in Star Trek, I guess, if you look at this cover.
There's so much happening in every single one. It's sort of like the first episode of season 3 of Picard, the amount of Easter eggs everywhere and nods to certain pieces here and there. Yeah, you see a whole lot of stuff happening from a whole lot of different places. You've got Worf and Spock standing next to each other. You've got B'Elanna Torres looking like she's about to get into fight with a mirror universe of herself. And then at the end, there's just this giant Scotty head in a psychedelic Jeffries tube. I just can't get enough of that one. Wow.
Yeah, definitely. And the annual issue sounds really interesting with this official synopsis we got as well for that. So it's coming out May 31st, written by Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing, with art by Rachel Stott. So let's read this synopsis because this sounds amazing. The Theseus crew finally get a chance to relax, but just as everyone settles down, a strange signal comes in, a message that reads, "Mr. Scott, we have a problem. Bring help. Jim." Upon finding the source of the signal, the Theseus bridge crew step into a fully activated holodeck, recreating the bridge of the original USS Enterprise, complete with a discovery of some strange new guest stars. And the quote marks are in the text. I'm not adding those. Join the writers behind the critically acclaimed Star Trek series, Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly, for an exciting romp through the history of Trek with art by Rachel Stott. So this looks incredible. And this cover, we've got Kelvin Kirk in the background. We've got Georgiou. We've got, I see Saru and Quark and Archer. Anybody you can think of is there.
It gives me real Amalgam vibes. If you read comics in the mid-90s when the X-Men Age of Apocalypse thing really kind of threw Marvel Comics sideways, and then they kind of went back to Prime, but they also did this whole thing where DC and Marvel put all their superheroes together for a very short period of time. If you remember, it was called Amalgam or Amglam or whatever, and really getting those vibes out of it. There's a real kind of mid-90s, let's just try everything comic book vibe to this, and it kind of takes me back. So I don't know if I can devote the mental energy to reading all of these and what's all going to happen, but maybe I'll check it out.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, because we didn't even mention that, the Deep Space Nine Dog of War miniseries is still happening in May, and we have some great covers of that. My favorite of that one is Vic Fontaine with the pupper playing piano behind him. That's great. It's so good.
Oh, Jimmy Darren. Love that guy.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Well, our final bit of news before we get to our discussion this week is a bit of sad news. Gerald Fried, the Emmy-winning composer of Star Trek music from the original series, has passed away. Really, I mean, you listen to music from TOS, you have heard this guy's music, and I mean, there's a certain famous fight scene between Kirk and Spock that you will immediately recognize the music to. This guy has made a huge mark, not just on Star Trek, but pop culture. He also did scores for Roots and Gilligan's Island. And I mean, I'm rewatching Futurama right now with my wife, Nikki, and the number of times they riff on that TOS fight scene music, like it's the national anthem of Zoidberg's people, for example, when he has to return home to fight for a mate. Like, this guy was amazing, and very sad news today.
Well, as a person who likes, very big orchestral bits of music, he pulled from, again, some of the greats. Actually, speaking of Gustav Holst and the Planet Suite, there's a real Mars theme sort of feel to his Amok Time, that and then I just think about me playing with my pets. I would sometimes play that when they were battling a toy or something like that. It's always fun. I do have to give a quick shout out though. His title music to Kirk Douglas's Paths of Glory, which is set in the First World War, and I would say is still one of the greatest war movies ever made. That next to, I would say, the Battle of Algiers. Losing him is sad, but he leaves a legacy that is a gift that'll keep on giving. I'm looking forward to people maybe looking into his music a bit more and the cinema that he was a part of.
Absolutely. Well, let's take a brief break, and when we come back, let's talk Star Trek Picard. This episode of Positively Trek would not be possible without the support of those of you who have gone to patreon.com/positivelytrek and signed up to become a Patreon supporter of the show. Thank you all so very much for your donations. They truly do help bring this show to you each week. Thank you especially to our Constitution class supporters, Joyce Marin, Jim Stoffel, Jesse Earl, Dave Garcia, Rick Young, and Paul D. Kinnear. If you'd like to become a supporter of the show, go to patreon.com/positivelytrek. You can get perks such as early access to episodes, ad-free versions of episodes, exclusive content, shoutouts, associate producer credits, and much more. Once again, that's patreon.com/positivelytrek. Thank you all once again. And now, let's get back to the show. So, this is kind of a first for this new era of Star Trek, in that we are starting a final season of a show, which we haven't done yet in this new era of Trek, as I say. So, Discovery is still going, Lower Decks, Prodigy, Strange New Worlds is just starting out. I mean, this is kind of interesting. I'm really curious to see how this group of people ends a show. And with one episode out so far, we kind of get a little bit of a hint as to how they're constructing this season and stuff. So the first episode of season 3 of Star Trek Picard, entitled The Next Generation, which I thought was kind of cheeky fun. And we start out with, normally I go through these episodes and do Easter egg videos where I point out all the Easter eggs. It's very rare that the very first frame of a show is just 100% a big Easter egg.
Yeah.
And we get that with this in the 25th century in that Wrath of Khan font. So
Super. In the 25th, instead of the 24th century, right? Like
23rd in Wrath of Khan, yeah.
Once I saw that, I was just like, okay, now I know. Now I know what they're going to do. They're going to steal a ship. They're going to, all these things are going to happen. It's good though. I don't mind it. And in fact, actually, not even just Wrath of Khan. It feels like it's kind of like, it feels like they're going to try to go in a couple of different directions ultimately, though I'd say the Wrath of Khan is the most heavy vibe. And yeah, stay tuned. Dan is going to do a big YouTube video on the whole thing, on all of the minute details, because good Lord in heaven, it was like a buffet of nostalgia at the beginning, hey?
Yeah, it was a little bit nuts. That video should be out by the time this episode comes out. So it's wild. It's 28 minutes straight of just Easter eggs. It's kind of crazy, which is, interestingly enough, if you listen to Patrick Stewart describing the project a few years ago, sounded like something he kind of wanted to avoid, right? He didn't want to get the band back together, as they say, and rehash The Next Generation and bring that all back together. He wanted to do something different, which the show certainly did for the first 2 seasons. So I'm curious, Barry, just overall, what were your kind of thoughts on seasons 1 and 2, or maybe separately if you can't really lump them together, if you have different thoughts there?
Well, I think the big point about Star Trek Picard, and I have a complicated relationship with Star Trek Picard. I was really fortunate to have been asked by Bill and Dan at the Trek Geeks to host Picard Live, which was a kind of a synopsis live episodic thing where we would talk about each of the pieces of Star Trek Picard as we went on, and spoke about it live with people commenting and guests coming on and whatnot. And I really enjoyed that. And I found Star Trek, the first season of Star Trek Picard, really tried to set a lot of things down. It seemed like it had a very solid kind of message on where it wanted to go-ish. And as it was moving along as a season, I felt like parts were kind of breaking off a little bit. It didn't conclude in a way that I was like, what? Oh, okay, all right, I guess this is how it ends, kind of thing. And in my time of rewatching that first season, I felt like, okay, they're really going to have to account for a lot of things, but they've also got a lot of, pieces rolling. The second season, I know like people are very upset with, how only Strange New Worlds and kind of Lower Decks are episodic. Everything else is storyline based. Well, I feel like each of the Picard series or seasons so far have been like their own episode, unrelated to one another to a certain degree. So I feel like with a bit of constructive criticism, my hope is that they have a story figured out and they stick to it, because it's happened in Discovery in the first couple of seasons where they did a massive tone shift and a massive shift away from what the original plan was. And I think that's ultimately what's happened with Picard. And for them to sort of sprinkle all this nostalgia on us, I feel like it is kind of like they're shaking the Etch-a-Sketch a little here. And like Picard's androidness, I don't remember that being brought up. Now, I've only seen the episode once, but did that even get mentioned? Right? Did like Riker come up and like knock on his forehead and be like, hey, Jean-Luc, are you in there? Kind of thing? Like nothing. So I feel very much like if you haven't seen the previous 2 seasons, that's totally okay. You're not going to miss anything, because they've also like, Aside from Laris, who remains from the actual like original piece of that series? Like every other cast member has sort of been like unceremoniously shed from the story, leaving Picard behind, which again isn't necessarily a problem. Like I'm not going to say that like this is like something to say like, well, this series has been a mess all along or anything like that. They're trying things. My only hope ultimately, if I reflect back to season 1 and 2, is you've put a lot of really cool stuff here in the first episode. Are you going to be returning to them all? Because the first episode really fills me with some anticipation. So if they drop some of these big plot points and just leave them dangling loose like they have before, I will be disappointed. Is that fair?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think your point about leaving seasons 1 and 2 behind, I don't want to say they think of them as a failure. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I feel like they tried some stuff and the response maybe wasn't quite what they wanted. So they said, okay, well, let's give them what they want a little bit, which is shaky ground for me. Like I'm not a huge fan of a fan base dictating where something goes sometimes. Like sometimes that can get a little iffy. That said, I'm heartened and I'm excited by what I've seen so far. And yeah, leaving everything behind from seasons 1 and 2, with the exception of Laris, and I would add Raffi as well, is back in this.
Yeah, Raffi. Sorry, yeah, forgetting her.
But besides that, like they really have left a lot of stuff behind. And my worry and my kind of sadness, especially for the folks who worked very hard on those first 2 seasons, I'm kind of flashing forward to like 15, 20 years from now when people are discovering Star Trek and, you know, the old school fans are advising them on what they should watch. I could totally see somebody saying like, oh, watch this, watch that. When you get to Picard, just skip seasons 1 and 2, go right to season 3. And that makes me sad. Like that makes me sad. But I get that as well. So I don't know.
I guess, yeah, to kind of like land my plane of constructive criticism, at least with one engine still going, I would say that watching the first 2 seasons of Picard is entertaining, and like stuff happens and it gets resolved, and I think the actors do a relatively good job of it. So it's entertaining and fun. But if you want something that I feel like, I don't know, I always go back to like, what seasons of the new Star Trek would I like happily go back to? Anything after season 3 and onward, and Discovery I've rewatched. I watch Lower Decks pretty often. Strange New Worlds is going to get a rewatch. Prodigy is going to get a rewatch. So it's, you know, I always go by rewatchability. And aside from like making sure that I have context when you and I talk, I probably wouldn't go back to Picard season 1 and 2 either, just for the sake that there's just so many loose ends that it kind of, I don't know. So let's make sure it goes, and I'm very happy with all of the nostalgia, but I really hope this isn't going to be a nostalgia driven series only. I hope they just give us this big glut, this kind of big like dollop of nostalgia right on top of all this with a cherry, and then we can move on and get to the story, right? Because Worf is different. Crusher's in trouble. And I saw just recently on the Twitterverse, there's a picture of Riker when he's on the bridge of the Titan. And then the next scene is the opening title credit to Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. So it's just Riker and then it says Return of the King. And so,
oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, he's Riker the White now. That's nice.
Right? Exactly. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. And I mean, Jonathan Frakes is a wonderful person, and I love it when he gets work.
Yeah. Here.
In front or behind the camera. Oh man, I hope he gets to direct some episodes.
I think he is. I think he's slated to direct a couple episodes.
Perfect.
I'm pretty sure. I'd have to double check that, but I think that is the case.
Yeah.
So yeah, this kind of shedding of what this show was in seasons 1 and 2, interestingly goes beyond the story. So in seasons 1 and 2, we had, like I said, Patrick Stewart saying, we don't want to get everybody back. And now season 3, hey, we're getting everybody back. And that's fun. But beyond that, the show looks different too. And it's done in a way that's very different from any of the live action series we've seen so far. The opening credits are no longer the opening credits. They're at the end of the episode, which was a little sad. I was kind of missing that. I'm in my old man yells at cloud mode, that's not how you used to do it. On the flip side of that, the one thing that I loved was seeing the title card for the episode on screen, which is something live action new Star Trek has not done. So no Discovery, no Strange New Worlds, no Picard up till now has done that. And we got to see part 1, The Next Generation, on screen, which, that makes my old man yells at cloud self very happy.
What do you think of Terry Matalas coming on? Like, he's done stuff like 12 Monkeys in the past, like he definitely has an interesting pedigree, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was one thing that I was very excited about with regards to season 2 with some of the stuff they were doing. And then the way that season kind of went made me a little bit more trepidatious, but then you kind of learn that he was showrunner for the first half of season 2. Then he kind of left to work on season 3.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel things kind of went wonky. So I'm like, oh, okay, maybe, I don't know. So, but so far, I love his enthusiasm. He's a fan. He is a capital F fan, which is sometimes good, sometimes bad. I don't think there's a universal rule you can apply. Nicholas Meyer was the furthest thing from a fan when he came in, and his Star Trek was incredible.
Yeah.
John Logan, who wrote Nemesis, apparently was a huge fan. And, moving on from Nemesis anyway. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but I love his enthusiasm.
Well, and he also did write for Enterprise too. One of the later series, 3, I think.
Yeah, and he was a production assistant on the show before that as well.
And I mean, to be honest with you, we gotta agree here. Enterprise got better with time. Seasons 3 and 4 were delightful, right? If I think about you've got your Xindi arc, I guess you could say, goes through that, and it was very interesting, right? I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, and season 4, when it first aired, I was honestly saying it was the best season of Star Trek since Deep Space Nine season 6.
I think the season is in good hands. I hope he ends it nicely. I hope he, sticks around, because this is the point, is so much has been brought up. So much has happened, right? You're talking about the Easter eggs immediately. Even look at Bev Crusher's coat jacket, right? It looks like it's from the Wrath of Khan. We're spoilersing here? Are we given spoilers?
I think we can, let's give the internationally recognized spoiler warning here.
Yes.
I think.
So if you have not seen Star Trek Picard season 3, episode 1, and you don't mind having major plot points given away, then continue listening. And if you don't, please stop listening, put it on pause, go watch the episode, and then come back. So what do you think about the stuff she's carrying? And I know we're getting into a bit of the Easter eggy bits here, but I think they're also big plot points. She's carrying Jack around with her. What do you think of that? As in all his stuff.
Yeah, the same case that we saw in Family. Okay, so here's one of my things that I think is kind of funny, and the writers in the past have kind of done Beverly dirty, unfortunately, in that in the films, the TNG films, she was basically a cameo in a couple of them. And so these Easter eggs, these things she's carrying around, it's funny how they had to stretch to find things to populate. She has the pearl necklace that she wore when she went on the holodeck in the first season episode, The Big Goodbye. That's how far down they had to reach to find things that mattered to Beverly Crusher, because, beyond putting the anaphasic candle ghost thing on that table, the most meaningful thing is the Jack Crusher case. Absolutely.
I feel like that's going to be a big plot point, though. And and obviously with her kiddo at the end, which is another massive Wrath of Khan connection here, the hidden son appears, right? I feel like this is going to not only be a Picard heavy. I feel like by introducing Beverly Crusher like this, I feel like she is going to be kind of his foil, almost, maybe to some degree, or the other side of the story, maybe.
Yeah, that could be. I'm really fascinated to see these dynamics, and the revelation that neither Picard nor the rest of the crew has even seen Crusher for over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of a massive bombshell dropped. What led to that? What's going on there?
Yeah.
I mean, I have a couple guesses, but
yeah. And looking at how he was sort of wistfully looking at his past, but then also saying he can kind of move on from it. I find it interesting when Laris talks to him about Crusher. I feel like in earlier seasons he would have maybe had more to say the way he was characterized, but in this case I feel very much that Jean-Luc is being more a Jean-Luc that I would recognize from the TV series. Doesn't he say something along the lines of like, we were close or something like that when Laris mentions her?
Yeah, and Laris ever the person who just goes straight to the point, says you were lovers once, or you tried to be lovers, I think she said.
So, I mean, obviously this calls the question, is this son Jean-Luc's? Right? That's a big question. I actually have other thoughts of what might be happening there too, but we'll see. Do you think she's going to be sort of like the chase to this entire season? Or do you think they won't do that necessarily?
It feels like she's pretty central. And I mean, early days, of course, we're not sure, but it really feels like, at least with her whole situation being the inciting incident for the season, even that really excites me, just because, like I said, how her character has kind of been relegated to background in the past. So I'm really excited to see her being more central, and I really hope that carries through for the season.
One little possible mild flex, I don't know if you remember, it was one of the panels, either the year it was announced or the year after it was announced, I can't remember, but Gates McFadden, when she mentioned when Sir Pat came out and said Jean-Luc Picard is back, and we all stood up and yelled and cheered, and it was an amazing moment. And this could be apocryphal, but Gates, from what I remember, said that she was actually in the bathroom at the time and like heard commotion and was like, what's happening? And they're like, Sir Pat's doing Picard again. She's like, oh, that's nice, and just kind of like moved on, and like thinking now she's like one of the major focal points of season 3. I do think, as much as you and I kind of talked a little bit about what, Sir Pat and the original showrunner writers were saying, that this is going to be kind of, Jean-Luc going and doing his own thing with a smaller non-Starfleet affiliated crew, kind of going to adventure kind of thing. And that just dropped out. As much as it is this massive shift and everything, getting to see these familiar faces, getting to see these actors who, from the STLVs I've seen and been to, these people are ready to act, right? Like when I spoke, I got a chance for Jonathan Frakes to sign one of my Eagle Moss Titan ships, and I asked him if the Titan was going to show up in an episode of Star Trek soon, and he leaned in real close to my ear and he went, "We'll see," and let out a big cackle. And just thinking like, these people were ready to do this for a while. They've wanted to do this for a while. I'm sure getting the Star Trek TV series paycheck is nice, but also like, one thing I did notice about this, as opposed to the other 2 seasons of Picard, you can really tell everyone's having a good time. Like,
yes,
the actors seem happy. Whereas I didn't always get that impression from seasons 1 and 2 of Picard or Discovery at the beginning. There was a lot of like, I don't know, there's just a mood. Mm-hmm. And it's a happier tone for sure.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think nobody exemplifies that more in this episode than Jonathan Frakes as Riker. He has such a way about him that just makes me smile every time he's on screen.
He's kind of a pixie. He's like
a little bit.
He's like a macho pixie. I love him.
Yeah, I think the only time I was like, uh-oh, was when he was talking about Deanna and Kestra. And what's going on there? Uh-oh, that's an uh-oh. But beyond that, like, I'm thinking his meeting with Sidney LaForge on the bridge of the Titan, that was so delightful.
It's good, like, back and forth. There was good. He adds the banter that you want, right?
Yeah. Yeah, what did they call you at the Academy? I can't remember. Crash LaForge. Oh, yeah. Because you crashed a shuttlecraft. Twice. Okay. How amazing would that be for one of these young actors? And maybe, I know not everybody in the world is a Star Trek fan, but like, oh man, sitting on the bridge of a starship, putting your hand to your ear and saying, "Control tower reading, sir," and getting ready to leave space dock. That's my dream. I feel like Captain Harriman. There we go. On the Enterprise B, we have a group of living legends aboard. And
Yeah,
they're
right?
like, oh, great, thanks.
Yeah. Well, and this is very much, there's an undiscovered country vibe to that as well, and a generations vibe where I just feel like in this case, there's no necessary torch to pass. There's nothing radically coming out to me that they're here to bring anyone into the new Trek world. I feel like this is something of a final chapter, even in the way this first episode is portrayed. And I don't mind. Like, they're always like, oh, they'll pass on the torch. And I'm like, well, I feel like the torch is already passed. Discovery is doing well, and Strange New Worlds is doing well. Like, there's other pieces of this, and I know that there isn't a lot of next generation sort of era specific stuff happening right now necessarily, but I don't really mind. I don't mind that this could just be a final chapter story.
The passing the torch thing is interesting, though, because now that I think about it, I'm like, okay, so we have a Beverly Crusher kid, possibly a Picard kid. Mm-hmm. We have a LaForge kid, and, spoilers for trailers and other stuff, there's more coming.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a new crew out there led by Alexander, Worf's son, I guess? I don't know. Yeah, we could have TNG Babies, the show, or something. I don't necessarily want that, but yeah, that could be.
Well, I mean, they're doing that on Netflix. I just finished watching the series of that 90s show. It was, again, maybe a 10 or 11 episode arc of basically what happened to Eric and Donna's daughter, who is named Leia, which is, I don't know. There's, again, just a lot of nostalgia and a lot of, hey, look, remember that and stuff. And again, I could tell that the audience in that show, I could tell that the actors in that show new and cameo returns, and then obviously Red and Kitty are back kind of full time. And of course, Red Foreman, Kurtwood Smith, he actually played in Voyager, I think it was, for a while.
Yeah, he was Anorax in Voyager. He was the Federation president in Star Trek VI, and he was the Cardassian security chief of Deep Space Nine in
Yeah. Holy crap, I forgot about the Cardassian part. I loved it when he had that the amazing facial hair. When he was the Federation president. That was my favorite.
Oh, and he was also in Lower Decks as well.
Holy crap, that guy gets work. But anyway, back to it. Though it was just a nostalgia-heavy romp through, hey, remember that 70s show and how your parents liked this stuff, and now you're old enough to be your parents when that 70s show came out, so we're going to do that 90s show. I feel like, here we are, sands in the hourglass sort of thing with Picard. I don't personally want we're the children of the Enterprise D/E crew traveling around space having new adventures. I don't know. I don't find that appealing at all, personally. I don't know if that's positive or not, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you, for sure. I wouldn't mind something with Sydney LaForge as a character. I just from this one episode, I'm like, I want to know more about her.
She's very interesting, yes.
Yeah, just as a character in and of herself. We haven't even really seen her with regards to Geordi. We just know she's Geordi's kid. That's not the most interesting thing about her, I don't think. Yeah, so the Titan. Let's talk a little bit about this ship, because I have some thoughts, and there's kind of two sides to this. First of all, they kind of want to have their cake and eat it too. If you read some supplementary material outside of the show, which I don't think is necessary, and I don't think what they did is necessary, they said Riker's original Luna class Titan was heavily damaged. They brought it into space dock intending to refit and repair it, decided, oh, it's too far gone, let's build pretty much a whole new ship. But let's use the components of the Titan in this new ship. So this new ship has the bones of the old Titan, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. If you're going to have a Titan A, just have a Titan A, say the first one is destroyed, whatever. I think they're trying to, fan service, make some connections and that sort of thing. Totally unnecessary. B, and I know there's mixed feelings on this, I think this ship is freaking gorgeous. Yeah. I love it. It's beautiful. I absolutely love it.
I just can't be mad at the ship designers. I just can't. And as much as I actually the original Titan was just absolutely gorgeous to me as well. I loved the downward facing sloped, that kind of 45-degree angle nacelle look to it. I would love to travel around in that ship as much as possible. But the new Titan, as much as I heard they were redesigning it, I'm like, really? That's not nice. Oh my God, it's beautiful. So yeah, it's okay. I don't mind. New ships is always something I like to see. There's a lot of the original Enterprise, or sorry, there's a lot of the refit feel to this Titan, which obviously calling it the A gives you again that sort of feel. It's got the glowing deflector. It's wonderful. I love the ship, and I look forward to seeing it get into some serious action.
There's a little, I don't know if you caught this one, there's a shot of a Pathfinder class ship on Raffi's big spy board from Star Trek Online. And the label above it, very, very faint, but if you pause and look, it says Voyager B.
Ooh, I didn't spot that. That sounds cool.
So that would be the third Voyager.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. I also really liked Crusher's ship as well.
The Ilios.
Yeah. It's a unique design, I think, is the best way to put that one. I found it kind of weirdly ugly when I first saw it, but I also thought the same of the Defiant. So maybe it'll be a ship that'll grow on us.
So the first officer of the Titan is a familiar face, as Riker says. We have Commander Commander Annika Hansen.
Yes. I was about to correct you.
Because apparently her captain feels it's his place to dictate what name she uses, which I found bit of an interesting parallel to some of the discussions / dictates put forward by certain parts of our society. That was interesting.
And I'm not trying to make excuses for Riker, but I can completely understand his desire to not have really any references to the Borg.
Oh, Shaw, you mean, yeah.
Or sorry, Shaw, yeah. If you think about the Federation's back and forth with the Borg, its relationship that has been always very negative, I can understand to some degree not wanting to bring that up. I think the relationship that the Federation has to the Borg and those people who might necessarily be in between it, you're not dealing with sort of an oppressed oppressor. I feel like you're dealing with two very equally capable of oppressing groups, right? The Federation sometimes gets known as kind of like the Diet Borg, right? In the sense that the Federation also assimilates to some degree, but they assimilate through diversity kind of thing, right? I can see where they're going with some of that. I just don't know if that plot point holds as much, just given the background and the history.
Yeah, it's interesting, Shaw's perspective, and I mean, I can understand that as well. I think it's misplaced where he's directing that. And it's obvious he has some animosity towards the Borg. I mean, obviously, who wouldn't? But, you know, his kind of chastising of Picard in 7 as former ex-Borg.
Yeah.
And that was definitely a bit of a hint of some prejudice there. But I would almost liken it to, you know, back in the day when Worf first joined Starfleet. If there's someone like, that name is too Klingon, you have to call yourself Mike. That I can't, you know. I don't know. It felt definitely icky to me that, and obviously 7 of 9 doesn't like having to call herself Annika Hansen.
No, I mean, Seven's entire arc has been one of finding yourself in two extremely homogenizing civilizations, right?
Mm-hmm. And part of her big arc in season 2 was the fact that people look at her differently because she's Borg. So this is definitely reinforcing that she's still made to feel less than because of her past kind of thing. So, interesting to see where that goes. There's some hints in the closing credits, I think, that might give some insight into Shaw as well. I guess, yeah, let's talk about Shaw a bit then, because I think this guy deserves his own section of this episode because he is brilliantly played by Todd Stashwick. I've said in the live show, like, I've watched this episode 4 times. I've rewatched that dinner scene between Shaw, Picard, and Riker and 7 8 times. That is so good. Like, he is a character that at this point you love to hate, but the actor is playing him so well. It is so beautiful.
I love the love to hate people. And I mean, like, actors that you kind of dislike, but like, you know, maybe a bit of a Jellicoe vibe to him. to some degree.
I feel like Styles in Star Trek 3 as well. I'm getting some vibes where he's got his little riding crop and like this is his ship and it's run tight.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, he is a bit of a Styles, isn't he? Well, and again, they're pulling from each series just a little bit here and there, right? I mean, if we're into spoilers and stuff like that, Amanda Plummer is in here, and we get some serious Undiscovered Country, feel, right? Obviously, with her coming in, and I can't not think about her opening scene in Pulp Fiction when she's standing in a sundress holding a 38 special in a LA diner, swearing at everybody. She definitely pulls a bit of that out, that kind of manic anger, which I do find only Amanda Plummer can do. But I think where I'm getting at here is I wonder where Shaw's going to land with this new villain and how he's going to respond to her. Either he's going to be a heroic, brave fighter against her, or something's going down. That's what I'm thinking.
This actor, he's so good. He's actually been in Star Trek before as well. He was the Romulan spy on Vulcan in the closing moments of the Enterprise Season 4 episode Kirshara, where Administrator Vlas is like, "You failed," and he's like, "The unification of Vulcan and Romulus will happen," or something like that. Yeah.
What a find, Dan! You're a freaking pro. What the heck? I didn't like. I see we're obviously. We have website pages open and we're looking at names so we know we're doing correctly here, but it says recurring. And I'm like, what else has he recurred in? How has he been in, like, I haven't seen him specifically, but there you have it. You found it.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't credit just myself. Others have pointed that out. So, but he's incredible. That whole scene, that line where he's like, "Look, I love you guys. I really do. I love reading about your crazy, irresponsible." He's so good.
Well, that's the Jellicoe, right? That's that part of like, we're going to stick to the book here,
Yeah. And the writing and how this scene plays out, he's able to say the most outrageous things, like, so that you feel like you've been slapped in the face, but he just keeps going. Like, he gets away with it somehow because he just commands the room and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
He's very backhanded. He's very backhanded, but in a very proper way.
I'm really looking forward to this guy and over the course of the rest of the season, seeing where, like you said, where he lands. That's great. Well, let's talk a little bit about Raffi. We haven't talked about her mission. This is kind of going on in concert with everything else, kind of separate from what's going on. She's investigating this attack. Yeah, and it turns out to be, this like portal style weapon or something. She has to figure out who the Red Lady is. Is it a buyer? Is it the perpetrator? And then she realizes it's a target, and we get, the Rachel Garrett Red Lady statue. That's kind of like, oh, Red Lady, is Michael Burnham showing up? Is the Red Angel again? What's going on here?
That did actually make me think a little bit of like, ooh, are they going to acknowledge the existence of the Discovery incident, I think is what they call it, or something, like, because there was a very, at the end, I think it was season 3 or whenever Michael goes into the future, there's that good, like, great, let's never talk of this again. And definitely they don't, but it would be interesting for at least some kind of knowledge to come forth from all of this.
Oh, I'm thinking like that conspiracy theory guy from Lower Decks, where he's like, there was this whole thing, this ship could travel on mushrooms, and this flying woman went through time, and people are like, okay, buddy, wow, jeez.
Yeah.
This guy's lost it.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a lot of pieces that they could just easily connect if they wanted to. Again, like I said, as long as they do that, they've got to go back and make sure that it's being there's no loose ends being left behind. I am happy though, because I'm looking at what is determined as who are going to be doing the directing, and it looks like we're getting Frakes for episodes 3 and 4 for sure.
That sounds right. Yeah, I think that was what I'd read. Yeah. So Raffi figures this out, but is unable to stop the attack in time, and we kind of see that, this is some new menace that's out there. We also have this mysterious faceless handler that's communicating with her via text message, basically. That's interesting. I wonder if that's someone.
I like that they're giving Raffi a lot to do. and she is an interesting character. I loved her struggles that she's managed to overcome. I really actually liked her story in season 1 specifically, especially around how she felt with her son. And so she's a very likable character, so giving her something really complicated to do makes me very happy. I never really connected with like Girardi as much per se, or Rios. I mean, I liked Rios to some degree, but I found them both like kind of unlikable in certain cases, whereas I didn't find Raffi pitiable. I felt Raffi was a very textury character who had a lot to her, but seeing her in uniform in the next season was just fantastic. So,
and I do like that there's an acknowledgement of those struggles in the past, but not not completely abandoning them.
Exactly.
I do have to say I was not fooled at the beginning, and I'm surprised looking online how many people were really thinking like, oh no, she's fallen off the wagon, this has happened. I was like, no, I immediately felt like she was undercover or something like that. That said, when she gets her hands on the narcotics, you can tell it's still a struggle, right?
The temptation's there.
Absolutely. Once you're an addict, you are always an addict, and it's a lifelong struggle. So I really enjoyed may be the wrong word. I really appreciated seeing that struggle played out, and the fact that it's not just swept under the rug. She's in this situation where there's that temptation around her all the time, and she's dealing with it. Really incredible. And Michelle Hurd is just so good. Like her reaction when the recruitment center on Metalis Prime is attacked, and her shock and despair.
And I think maybe that's where I'm kind of maybe leaning in. If they're going to pass the torch to anyone, I would watch a Raffi series. Just the way they're portraying her already, that the leaning in that direction, I would definitely watch a Raffi series. She's interesting. She's complicated. She is willing to get dirty. I just felt like the writing was trying to do more than just say like, oh, same old for Raffi kind of thing. So I also didn't buy the beginning either. I was like, oh, she's up to something. But also, who better to play the part, right? And I guess it's a testament to her progress and strength. So yes, I'm interested to see what happens here. Her sort of side quest story and all of this obviously is eventually going to find more connective tissue with the main plot. But very interesting beginning, and I hope this is a cool setup.
Well, speaking of setup, we come to our final scenes of the show and our introduction to this guy that turns out to be Beverly Crusher's son. And that's, I mean, all we can say for sure about him at this point. But I will say I am getting huge Tom Hardy Shinzon vibes from this guy right at the end. And Ed Spilliers, great actor. I loved him in Downton Abbey. I know he's been in a bunch of other stuff, but that's kind of where I know him from. I mean, look at him. I mean, come on, right?
Yeah.
Come on.
I guess, and again, this is I Googled this just to see if I'm unique or not, and it looks like 30 other reviewers already have said this, but I am not fully convinced he's a son. I think he's a clone.
That could be too.
I think he's either Jack's clone or he's an android, and he's basically made into Jack. I think Crusher has been gone for 20 years, and I think she has inverted a bit, and which will make her a more interesting character, right? But that's where I'm at. I think when I first saw him, when I saw him acting, when I saw him, like, he even looks like that actor from the holodeck who played Jack. Remember? I forget.
Doug
but
Wirt, yeah.
Yeah, like there's like they cast him well. So I do kind of wonder if perhaps what we're looking at is not a son, which actually I think kind of keeps that sort of always infatuated, never realized feeling of Jean-Luc and Crusher, that they were always just near to the goal but never quite there. And maybe because of that, Crusher, obviously seeing Wesley grow up and then join with the Traveler and stuff like that, she's definitely estranged from the men in her life, right? Every one of the men in her life is estranged from her, either through death, through, moving on into a higher plane of existence and going into more amazing things and whatever else. And then the almost but not quite of Jean-Luc Picard. I don't think it would be outside of her motivations to be like, screw it, I'm going to make a Jack clone.
That's interesting. I like that thought. And if you look at the closing credits of this episode, there are little Easter eggs and hints and clues that are related to whichever cast member's name is on the screen at the time. Mm-hmm. And for Ed Speleers, it was a DNA double helix with a bunch of, listing the genome and stuff. So that could be something along those lines, that what you're saying, or it could be like, what's his lineage? Who is he descended from?
Yeah.
So that could go either way. Interesting.
Well, with Picard sort of doing away with the things of his past, right? He is very much moving on and not really relying on the history of his achievements or anything that he's discovered, right? It's very kind of at the end of Star Trek Generations when he picks up that really cool clay figurine that he was super fascinated with when he saw it in the series. I forget what episode it was, but it's some archaeological thing.
The chase, yeah.
Yeah. And then like he just sort of drops it like whatever after the Enterprise has crashed. Outside of those little inconsistencies, this shows that Jean-Luc Picard has moved on in a lot of ways. He no longer is as attached, so I feel like it makes him ready to be a different person. Worf is a very different person in this series, and I see Crusher potentially being a very different person. And you even saying like they had to really dig back to find her nostalgic elements and stuff like that. They're doing more with the character, so why not do something really drastic? They have the room, right? There isn't a precedent for Dr. Crusher other than being like a responsible carer who has a bit of a tryst with the captain kind of thing. Like that's how she was written originally, right? And she becomes more three-dimensional as time moves on, or multi-dimensional as time moves on. But this would be an interesting thing where she's never gotten over Jack. I think that's abundantly clear, right? Even in the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard, Jack comes up a lot. He's important. So I would be interested to see what they do with her.
Definitely. Well, more to come for sure. And I know we didn't say we were necessarily reviewing the episode or rating it or anything, but what'd you think of this? Is this good? Is it bad?
Well, nothing so black and white, my friend, but there is always, and it's a bit of a dying argument because we're swimming in Trek right now, is the idea of like, you should just be happy there's Star Trek. You don't remember, right? You know, at the end of season 4 of Enterprise, it was the dark time, right? There was nothing except for Star Wars, right? And all this. But then, you know, obviously like Battlestar Galactica was around that time. You could always go back to some delicious Babylon 5. And, you know, I mean, without streaming services and whatnot helping resurrect Star Trek, no, I can appreciate that just having Trek on the screen is good. I have found that some of the Trek, like you've said, they've either been to hell with the fans, or they seem afraid of the fans, or sometimes they want to do something different and then the fans get mad, so then they like immediately retract it, which then wipes the story and whatnot. So I guess like the showrunner is the showrunner, the actors are in and they've filmed it, so let's not mess with it. Let's just let this story go. Let's see it to its end, its final conclusion. We don't need to worry about people being happy or angry or anything else about those sorts of things. Let's just get a good story in there. So this first episode was very nostalgia heavy, and I like that because I like nostalgia, but also if you have no reference for it, then it's just a bunch of cool imagery. And for some of us, maybe that much nostalgia is a little exhausting to sustain throughout a multi-episode arc. So I hope that's it. I hope we've got our nostalgia bomb. There'll be a few more through. I'm absolutely certain of it, but let's not lean on it. And I really want to see these actors get back into their old skins and interact with each other. And I've already felt that way. So I would say out of 10, I am like an 8 out of 10 hopeful. And, but I'm reserving whether or not this is good or bad yet, but I enjoyed it. Is that a good way of saying I'm hopeful?
Yeah. It's the cautious optimism that, like, let's be fair, Picard seasons 1 1 and 2 have conditioned us to have a little bit, where like season 2 started out so strong, and honestly I feel like it kind of went all over the place towards the end. And I guess part of me is a little wary that might happen again. I have indications and hints that that's not the case this season, based on people I trust who have seen quite a bit further ahead and feel like it's more coherent and cohesive, but I don't know that yet. So I'm a little wary, but I really enjoyed this hour of television. It was great to see Picard and Riker on screen together again, being Picard and Riker on the bridge of a starship. Interestingly enough, being the Badmiral on the ship under false pretenses that he so hated when admirals came aboard his ship. So in that way, I'm kind of with Shaw a little bit. Like, this is Admiral Pressman coming aboard trying to use the Enterprise to test a cloaking device.
100%. Yeah. And those little nods I think are really great. I think ultimately what Picard tried to do was tell a human story, right? Very human, very gritty, very, like if you think about Jurati killing Maddox, that made her completely unlikable. Like, after that point, I wrote that character off. Like, honestly, as much as they tried to rehabilitate her a few times, I was like, next, like, you made this character completely unredeemable in my eyes. And they've done that a few times by being like, we will make this as gritty as possible. And if you think about the Romulan siblings in the first series, like the sister whose name completely escapes me. And that's the problem, right? She is so one-dimensional and so unlikable. Like, she should have been a Sailor Moon villain. Like, that's the vibe I got off of her. Just completely unredeemably evil. The good in people need to also be done. And I think the only character that they did that effectively, consistently, was with Raffi. And I'm glad they've kept her for that reason, because she weathered a lot of those pieces of her in a really positive way. So give your characters some more depth, some more dimensions. That's perfectly fine. Give Crusher some flaws and some thises and that's and whatever else is, but do not make them completely irredeemably unlikable like you have in the past. Is the only other thing I'd say.
Well, we want to hear everyone else's thoughts as well. So please reach out to us, positivelytrek@gmail.com, or check us out on Facebook in the Positively Trek discussion group. We would love to hear from you. You can also find my YouTube channel, youtube.com/KurtratsProductions. That huge Easter egg video is out now. So go watch that and let me know what I missed. I'm not going to say if I missed anything. Just let me know what I missed, because I know I did. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate you. And thanks, of course, to the Patreon supporters. We really appreciate your making these episodes possible. We will see you in the next one. Until then, as always, stay positive.